Hello, folks, in another edition of the Modern Agile Show. I'm here with Karl Scotland, and we've
Josh.
known each other for many years now. Very involved in the Lean community. It's the day after Lean Agile US here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and we thought it'd be great to just sit down and chat. It's been a long time.
Yeah, good to see you again. It has been a long time.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for coming across the pond.
That's all right. It's always good to come over when I can.
Yeah, so you are very, very important to Modern Agile because when I first wrote a blog about it several years back, the very first blog I'd ever written on Modern Agile, you wrote a comment.
Mm-hmm.
And what did you say in that comment?
So the timing, it was good timing. So I'd been spending a lot of time thinking about strategy, I kind of talk about deploying agility strategically. So
You mean not as a cargo cult?
exactly right. So I spend my early days of my career, coming in thinking I'm the agile expert. I've done all this. I've done my Scrum training and all my other training. So I can come in and I can solve problems. And the realization, and I think that's kind of what got me into the Lean and Kanban community in the first place was, there's some other ways of doing this. I can start experimenting. I can start figuring things out for myself. But at the same time, we're not reinventing the wheel.
Right.
So there's still some good history and some good practice and some good experience that we want to draw on. So how do we balance those two things? And strategy and kind of deploying what we're doing strategically seemed like a good way of doing that. So, and certainly I'm kind of tying it back to the organizational strategy. So again, I've seen and been involved with agile implementations, transformations where there's lots of agility going on. Organization isn't getting any benefit because the teams are doing the wrong stuff, or the teams are doing good stuff, but it's not aligned with the rest of the organization. So kind of ties in with that whole theme of business agility or enterprise agility. To me, it's strategic. So I was kind of getting into that right at about the time you wrote your blog post, and it seemed to me that the way you were describing modern agile was describing it as a set of strategies. And I think around about that time I'd gone back and revisited the manifesto and thought, well, actually, what if those kind of what we call the value statements in the manifesto were actually strategy statements?
Yes.
Then that opens up for me a whole kind of set of new possibilities around how do we implement those strategies.
Yes.
And it feels like a lot of the time we get bogged down by the tactics, the practices and the methods, and we forget what the original strategies were.
Right. Right. Yes.
Going back to the strategies, we can invent new tactics. We can invent new ways of doing that.
It's because they're generative. But those I call them principles now instead of strategies, but it's really the same thing. I mean, I don't see much difference there. Calling those four modern agile phrases strategies works for me.
Yeah.
It's just that we kind of want you to be doing all four if you can in the ideal setting.
Right, because they're synergistic and they work well together.
That's right. But what you did was, so in my blog I had pointed out like these four principles, but then there were also about 12 practices, which at the time I thought, well, this is kind of good, really good stuff here. But over time I realized that there were two things that happened. One was your comment pointed out that the four principles were kind of a nice upgrade for the manifesto's value statements. We value this over that. The leftovers, as Woody Azul calls them, that we value the left stuff over the right stuff.
Yeah.
And you were talking about that, I think, as a kind of way to look at a strategy, as a way of like you said, it's strategy, but it's potentially more valuable than what the leftovers say.
Yeah. So for me, strategies are a good strategy is about choice. So a strategy is a choice because we're choosing to go in one direction rather than another direction. But it helps us make choices. So we decide what we're actually going to do because it aligns with a strategy.
Yes.
And that's why I think actually you can go back to the original manifesto. It's that leftover right is saying we choose these things over that. So they are about choices.
Yes. Or we value these things over that. We don't necessarily say don't do the things on the right.
Right.
But we value the things on the left more.
Yeah. If we're deciding what to do, we're probably going to go with things that are more left-sided.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, because when we come to work every day in a modern agile context, we're trying to make safety a prerequisite, no matter what we're doing. And again, modern agile is not just for software development.
Yeah.
It impacts our decision making. So you're 100% right to call them strategies.
Yeah.
And so anyway, your comment was very influential, and I thank you for that. It really got me to think that the essence of modern Agile was really those 4 statements, strategies, principles, whatever you want to call them. And that's what it became a little while after, where I just got rid of all the practices that I'd put in place and realized that this needs to be a very generative, I'm not going to say framework. It's not a framework. It's really just 4 things. But it's meant to help you think and generate implementations.
Right. So the other way I think about strategies is enabling constraints. So they are constraining what you're going to do, because you're going to choose not to do things because they don't conform to the strategy.
Correct.
But they're not governing you. They're not telling you what to do. So that's kind of a complexity language thing, about enabling constraints versus governing constraints.
I love that.
It enables us to make choices and enables us to, you've been talking about curiosity, so it enables us to be curious about what things we might do to meet the strategy, rather than the governing constraint just tells you what to do and says don't do anything else.
Right. So both of us have been around this lean agile space for a long time. Are we both agreeing that like being generative, being thinking, well, you said strategic agile, thinking about what you're doing and how does it map to the organization and how does it map to a good process that's helpful in furthering the outcomes you want, that's where we are. Right?
I want an organization to be able to figure out, to be able to solve its own problems. So it's rather than me coming in with a solution and saying try this solution, I can come in and maybe suggest some set of options, but ultimately I want the organization and the people to be able to kind of make their own decisions and get into running experiments and trying things out, understanding what's working, what's not working, amplify the stuff that is working, dampen the stuff that's not working, and eventually they figure out their own process.
How is that working for you commercially?
It's picking up actually. So it's slow, because a lot of the time people, you get the call and the call is, can you help us do Safe or do Scrum or do Kanban? I think my general attitude to a lot of that is if you've already made that decision, yes, I can come and help you. I'm not going to say no, but I'm going to do that, and let's figure out what Scrum means in your context,
right?
Or what Safe means in your context. So I'll try and help you. But actually, increasingly, I'm just getting organisations phoning up and saying, can you just help us? We think we need to be more agile. Can you help us be more agile?
So that's nice.
But there's no, coming back to constraints again, there's no kind of premeditated decision yet about what that means and what that's going to look like. And often it's organisations, and whether this kind of is a kind of a crossing the chasm or a kind of a organisation maturity thing. I think it's because they recognise that the out of the box solutions aren't going to work.
Right.
So they're actually looking for people who are, pragmatic, and pragmatism has a, has a bad reputation, because some people say pragmatic means, doing the things that are hard. To me, it's figuring out what's going to work in your context.
Yeah, I still think of it as a good word.
Yeah. To me, it's pragmatic. It means let's be sensible out and figuring these things out. But but what I kind of generally clear to people is I'm not going to come in and give you a solution.
Yes.
And help you implement that solution. I'm going to come in and help you explore and be curious about what might work and what might not work.
Yes. Yeah. So do you sometimes turn your customers onto ideas via storytelling or videos or something like, hey, back at this other client, we used to do this thing. It was really helpful.
So I think there's you can inspire people and kind of get people thinking.
Yes.
So a lot of the time people want case studies. Can you tell us where you've done this before? I get nervous about that, because case studies sometimes turn into, we want something we can copy.
Yeah.
Like what's worked before so that we can copy it.
The Spotify model is one of the most copied models around, and under what conditions does it actually make sense?
Yeah. Spotify's, I think, an interesting example in that, Spotify never intended that to happen. They were very clear that this is what we're doing now. This is a snapshot in time, and it's become this the new thing to do. You've got
to have a tribe and a chapter.
Yeah.
And nothing wrong with those ideas, but if you just copy them outright and don't understand why they need to be in place, and
it's almost as simple as a sign or you go into organisations and you hear some of that language, and it's a kind of sometimes a bit of a warning. But I kind of generally ask, what do you mean by tribe? What kind of tribe, what kind of chapter? And sometimes they've picked up the language and they are trying to copy it. Sometimes they've picked up the language and they're doing their own thing, and that's okay.
That's okay.
I don't have a problem with that. But I like to use the phrase, "Don't be a tabby cat trying to be a cheetah," which is a phrase I picked up from the running community because they talk about as amateur enthusiastic runners like me, it's not going to do me any good to look at an elite athlete like Mo Farah and say, I want to run like Mo Farah, so I'm just going to copy his training routine.
Could you move a little bit over? You're kind of your head's falling out of the frame here. I'd rather my head fall out of the frame than yours. Yes, so that's wonderful. Yeah, be like a cheetah.
Yeah. So the kind of
so cheat. No.
Well, it's in the same way that Mo Farah is an elite athlete because of not just his training plan but his DNA and his history and his. There's no point in me looking at a cheetah-like organisation like Spotify or Netflix or Apple or Amazon or those and just copy what they're doing.
Right.
Because it's more than just the practices.
Right.
It's the thinking and the people and the mindsets and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
That's not to say we can't learn stuff from them, but we shouldn't copy them.
So if you were to start with an organization that hadn't touched Agile, let's say they're still living completely in the waterfall age. However, they're doing plenty of work that is dwelling in the cone of uncertainty, that where we don't really know what we're building and if it's going to be good or not. How would you approach them? If they were interested in becoming more effective as an organization, where would you start?
So I usually start by asking them about what their aspirations are. So actually, what do they want to achieve as an organisation? And probably digging into some of the economics of the organisation, so the economic model.
Oh, love that.
It's usually to do with money somewhere that they want to make a certain amount of money or a number of customers or transactions. But getting down to what does it mean for this business to be successful? Maybe by the end of the year. Yeah. And then we can start talking about what is it that's going to stop us doing that? Right. So you're going straight to potential bottlenecks or things. Yeah, potentially. I mean, and this is where we kind of get into some kind of real. This is the real strategy stuff. So I usually build on Richard Rummelt's strategy kernel model. So he says a good strategy has who? Sorry. Rummelt. So Rummelt. Richard Rummelt has a book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which I highly recommend. And he says you should have a diagnosis, some guiding policies, and coherent action. So having figured out what are our aspirations as an organisation, what's the diagnosis of the current situation, which means we can't achieve those aspirations. I see. And then we can start getting into strategy, which is the guiding policy. So what sort of things should we focus on? And that's usually what are the critical challenges that we need to address, or what are the core key opportunities. And then what should we do? So does this get into, because here's what I observe. A lot of us fancy consultants come along with models and frameworks and various approaches, and we forget that we're dealing with just everyday flesh and blood humans who are potentially scared at work from their boss or deadlines and things like that. They're just dwelling in fear, or they're unhappy because of whatever situation occurred at work, or there's a lot of just people issues that have, like, if people were actually happy and cared for, then change could happen. Yeah, so a lot of time it's, particularly when it's from an agile perspective, imposed agile. Somebody's come in and decided we're going agile, and people don't agree with it or understand it, or start fearing for their jobs and their careers, because they don't really understand what the intended outcome is. Right. So the first thing actually is and this is why I start with understanding the organisation's aspirations and challenges is what's the common shared outcome that we all want to achieve. Right. And if we can get everybody agreed on a shared outcome, then we can start working on what do we need to change and what do we need to do to achieve that outcome. Yeah. So again, starting with the outcome rather than starting with the solution. Yep.
And so it's again back to this phrase a lot of us now are echoing, which is outcome over outputs.
Yeah.
Instead of like this mad focus on bring Agile in so we can increase our output, more stories done per sprint or whatever. Go away from that and go towards this outcome orientation.
Yeah. But that outcome orientation can be people centric.
Yes.
So what outcomes do the individuals on the teams want to get out of this in terms of their job happiness, their job security, their career progression?
Yes. Yes.
What does it mean for them personally to be successful? And if people then that kind of starts getting away from some of the fear of change and resistance to change.
Yes. And it shows that you care about them, because you care about their career, you care about them in terms of where they want to go with things and all that, and hopefully find alignment between their ambitions and what the organization needs.
Yeah. And it opens up the journey or the possibility for them to figure out what do they do to meet their outcomes,
right? As
opposed to somebody else and just telling them what to do with no thought for any outcomes at all, really.
Yes, and then I think some organizations get into this whole self-organizing teams where you get to choose what team you want to be on based upon is it a good match for your skills and your interests and all that. That's fascinating.
So so self-organizing teams is, I see a lot of self-organizing teams where you're giving teams a lot of autonomy, but people don't know what the outcome they're trying to achieve is. Right, so you kind of end up with chaos. Whereas aligning the autonomy with the intent of the change and the intent of the organization, people can now make more intentional, directional decisions on what they should be doing. Yeah,
treat them like adults, and adults, by the way, kind of get involved in finances. Yeah. Adults aren't like, hey, you guys are the money people, I'll just build something cool. No, you have to be fully aware of what is the ROI on this thing, what's the budget for it, what are we willing to spend in order to get a good return, in order to do some great, make our customers awesome, and make each other awesome. How do you do that if you don't have some association with money, with finance?
Yeah. Most organizations, if you talk to people and ask them, why are we working on this, how does this help the business, they can't talk about that in terms of, we're building these features or this product because we think it's going to help us get this number of customers, and we, as an organization, we think we need so many new customers or new types of customers, or we're going into a new market with this, which we think will get us this number of customers.
Versus of course the story of the man at NASA who was a janitor sweeping up the floors. They asked him, what's your role here? And he said, I'm helping send a man to the moon. Yeah. That's alignment.
Yeah, getting people.
I don't know if that's
aligned.
Apocryphal, but
I don't know.
It's a wonderful story.
It's a good story
about alignment.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. So, what other things are you exploring with these days? What modern concepts and ideas?
So my favorite, the model I use is, or the technique I'm kind of talking a lot about is called the X matrix. So it's an A3 format, so kind of single piece of paper.
A3, okay.
And it, like most A3s, it's a way of getting people to talk and collaborate and visualize nice and concisely some of the elements, and it brings in some of these things we've talked about. So, what are the aspirations of the organization? What are the strategies? What are the tactics? And I also talk about what evidence will we look for. So
it's very much like a chartering almost.
Yes, it's kind of charting, but it's almost kind of at the highest level, as high as you can
of the org itself,
of the organization, so that we can start visualizing and understanding what do we want to achieve, what do we need to focus on to get there, what are we actually going to do, how do we know whether things are working. So this is all it's all kind of hypothesis driven. So even your strategy is a hypothesis. It's what you think is the right thing to focus on.
Correct.
So you need to be thinking about what evidence will we look for, so you can start testing that hypothesis,
and then eventually change it if it's not really delivering.
And that helps people make decisions about their tactics, because you then decide we think it's worth trying this practice because it's going to move the needle and positively impact this type of evidence. Cool. That's kind of what I'm working with and playing around with organizations, and using that to drive change and tie all the change work back to strategy and helping organizations meet their aspirations.
That's very cool. You've gone all the way back to the root of the problem, which is the organization needs to be super clear what they're going after, no matter what method they use. If they aren't clear on what they're trying to achieve, what outcome, they're kind of it's kind of dangerous, right?
If we just jump in and jump to conclusions on what solutions are without considering the problem
Yeah.
and why we want to solve that problem.
I'd say almost you're making safety a prerequisite for organizational change by going straight to the top and figuring out why are we here, what are we doing this for?
Yeah.
What the heck are we trying to accomplish out there in the world?
Yeah.
And without that, it is actually not safe, because you can just build a bunch of stuff, have a bunch of teams fire up. Every day we come to work, we do stuff, but what are we achieving? What are we going for?
Yeah. Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you, Karl, for stopping by here in this office we've found at Ultimate Software today and in Florida. And I look forward to seeing you many more times in the future.
Yeah, thanks for talking to me. And, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah, see more of each other.
And you look great from all the running, so fantastic for you. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed running.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.